Welcome to the podcast that's dedicated to making you a faster cyclist, the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. I'm Coach Jonathan Lee with our head coach, Chad Zimmerman.
Hey, everybody.
And our CEO, Nate Pearson.
Hello.
And we are here to answer more of your cycling and triathlon related questions that you submit at trainerroad.com/podcast. We appreciate everybody that did submit questions this week. Please continue to do so. We love it. That's what keeps this whole thing going here. Before we, just getting straight into things, we've gotten a ton of questions recently, makes sense with the time of year, on how to pick a plan, and then how to stick to the plan too. That's like the other part of the question, right? So we're going to kind of go through, we're going to use a couple questions to kind of like set scenarios, and then we'll talk about the principles behind how we select a plan and kind of lay out like a guide. So whatever circumstances you find yourself in, you'll also be able to pick a plan and just be able to go right through it. Of course, if you have questions on these things, you can always submit them, like I said, at trainerroad.com/podcast. But hopefully this gives you what you guys will need. So let's start with Jan's question, or Jan, I'm not sure. I assume Jan actually, it's from Germany. So it says, my name is Jan and I'm a cyclist from Germany and new to TrainerRoad. Ian Pellier from the TrainerRoad team gave me the tip that you might be able to help answer my question. He's one of our support agents. Awesome. He says, in August of 2019, I have an A race and it's a 40K TT. It's literally all about this one race. So I for sure want to be in the best shape at this point. The training for this race should start soon, and I wonder with which plan I should train. So he says, would this sequence of training plans make sense, or what else would you recommend to me? Example 1, sweet spot base 1 and 2. That's a good start, right? That's what we recommend for pretty much everybody.
Pretty much everything.
Only time where that differs is when we're talking about triathlon plans, right? Triathlon plans have their specific base plans. But if you're doing a cycling related thing, in almost every scenario, we recommend just going with sweet spot base. There's 2 halves to it, 1 and 2. You complete them sequentially, and then your base phase is done. It's about 12 weeks of training. Then sustained power build. That definitely seems like a
40K TT, yeah. Yep. For sure.
And then going into the 40K TT specialty plan. So that's what we would recommend for sure if you're doing a 40K TT. That's ideal, right?
I think so, yeah.
Build phase is 8 weeks. Specialty phase is 8 weeks. You have your 12-week base phase. Put it all together.
So 28-week span here, and he's going to August, which means, about safely 30 weeks, which is nice because he's got a little bit of padding there to basically.
Life happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally,
Life happens, and if it just goes exactly as he plans, then he's got a couple weeks to pad it with something.
I'd like to see how many people where it actually goes exactly as planned.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
like
very
never.
few.
it's going to be the
Very
exception,
few.
that's for sure.
Yeah, that's just how life is. Like, even as a professional athlete, when you can engineer your life entirely around training and that being the priority, you still have things that come up. That's just how it is. So part of that too, and I guess we'll get to this a little bit later, but having patience and flexibility with yourself and the ability to kind of shuffle things around like that, really, it's something you have to have. But I guess guiding in general on training plans, I feel like a lot of the time people are tempted to pick the training plan. So we have like our training plans, like we talked about the base phase and the build phase. We have 3 different build plans. There's the short, general, and sustained power builds. And those are, short is talking about how long the I guess consequential durations of power output will be in the race.
Yeah.
General, it builds general, so you'll be a bit more versatile. And then sustained for something like 40K TTs, where you're really going to be putting out power for a long period of time. That's where we're really focusing on with that. But then when you get into specialty plans, it gets very specific, and that's kind of where we're more going to focus. For the build plan side of things, right, Chad? I mean, you look at the course or you look at how you're going to race it, and you say, okay, if I'm going to have to put out a lot of short power and do it repeated, I'll do short.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to determine whether or not you're a short power rider versus a sustained power rider. And if it's not, then you know you're probably somewhere in between, which should lead you toward the general build plan.
Yeah, so on specialty plans, I feel like getting into that and the selection there, I feel like a lot of the time we just pick it based on the course. Like this course has, a 40-minute climb right at the end of the race. So then you think I should do sustained, but then again, what if it's got a bunch of rollers before then? It gets kind of tricky.
Yeah,
and
you have to consider the physiology behind the demands of not just a single race, but in his case, perhaps just a single race. But in most riders' cases, most athletes' cases, the demands of a lot of different types of courses. Maybe similar, but still, I mean, a course with punchy climbs is still a climbing course. A course with sustained climbs still a climbing course, but 2 very different sets of demands with each.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like you kind of have to decide, like, am I fit enough to race this course how I choose to race it?
Yeah,
or will the pace be such that I really won't get to pick and choose and it just is what it is?
Yeah, you brought that up the other day, and I think that's really a very good first question, or a question that has to come early in the whole thought process is, am I fit enough to decide how I'm going to race come race day, or am I just out there to kind of hang in there and see if I can survive it?
Relatively few folks are, right? Like fit enough to say like, I'm going to race this however I want.
Yeah, a lot of people think they are, and then they get into 5-10 minutes of a race and realize, oh, that plan's not going to fly.
Mind. Yeah, it's a little tougher. So I guess let's talk about road racing, since that's, I guess, where we have a lot of questions around, because road racing demands, they vary quite a lot. I feel like if the course has rolling hills, or you plan to race the course like a puncher or punch you, or however you want to say it, but a person that's going to be aggressive and kind of an animator in the race, that would be a different approach than if you were to be going through and it's just going to be, you're going for long bomb breakaways, or it's got really long
defined. Because when I hear that term too in rolling, I like to think of it in terms of like
efforts.
Yeah, efforts. So what kind of, when you hear that, what duration of efforts are we talking about?
I don't know that there's any hard set definition, but by my definition, and therefore the plans, what they target, we're looking at
law.
Yeah, basically. Really anywhere from 3 to 8 minute sort of efforts. You get more than that, and you're starting to lean more toward your more sustainable power. But when you keep it in that 3 to 8 range, you can focus a little more on training that high intensity.
VO2 max.
Yeah, really. And all shades of it.
Some people, like 8 minutes, that's the end of like your max VO2 max power, right?
Yeah, you start pushing beyond 8 minutes, right in there, start pushing up towards 10 and 12 minutes. And again, everything kind of shifts. It has
threshold.
It's more threshold, more aerobically driven. Substantially more aerobically driven.
So I feel like when you look at whatever race that you're prepping for, like your A race, you should really be looking at it in terms of you should look at the profile, but then also look at it in terms of how you're going to end up racing that, right?
Yeah.
For example, like if you're doing something like Haute Route races, which we'll actually talk about a little bit later, like Haute Route Alps, which just has a ton of very long sustained climbs. In a scenario like that, you're looking at that and you're thinking, yeah, I'm definitely going to be doing something that's going to be more long climbs, more steady power, that sort of a thing.
Yeah, more conservative race approach.
Yeah, where that would change, even if you have something that has really steady climbs, is if you're on a race team and then you're the person that has to be the animator, so your job is to attack or to kind of,
or to cover.
Yeah, cover moves.
You're more of a sacrificial lamb in that case. So you're not really looking at the big picture. You're just looking at that day's stage and what those objectives are to protect whoever has the bigger picture.
Yeah, so in that case, you may very well go for something like the rolling road race plan instead of the climbing road race plan.
Perhaps, yeah.
So pretty much the difference between those two, rolling road race is more of those, like there's the low VO2 max efforts that go like real long 6-minute repeats, but at the over FTP, kind of with those efforts we talked about. And then climbing road race is more of the longer climb, some over under efforts, kind of what you would see on that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
So you're going to hug threshold a little more closely with the long sustained climbs, typically below it, but pretty close to it. So 90%, 95% sort of business. Whereas if you're going to attack the climbs, even if they're short ones, you're going to work above threshold for whatever duration you can withstand it.
Yep.
Yeah. So if you're looking at a road race and you're trying to select which plans to pick, hopefully those kind of guidelines help you. You're not just looking for the actual terrain. You are considering that, but you're also considering how you're going to race.
Yeah, you have to think more in terms of how the body responds to the demands, not what the actual demands of the course are, but how the body will respond to those demands, how your body will respond to those demands. Because you take two racers training the exact same way, you're most often going to get different outcomes. So you have to consider how you specifically will handle that course's demands.
What about Grand Fondo and gravel stuff? I feel like when you get into those, it's more about because they usually end up being longer days, in most cases. Even if somebody does a shorter distance, they usually are going to spend a good amount of time on the bike.
Yeah, it's just a little, I don't know if generic's the right word. It's just, there's not as much variety. You don't have to be good at a whole plethora of things. With a road racer, you got to be able to do just about everything. And how well you do each of those things is going to impact how well you perform. With a century rider, you pretty much just have to be good at one thing, lasting, doling out a steady amount of power below threshold, but again, reasonably close to it depending on how long it is. If it's a 50 mile versus a 100 mile, obviously that's going to change. You're not going to ride at 95% for 5 hours, but you could ride at 90%. Yeah, that's still a tall order. But the fact is, longer it gets, you're still sub-threshold, and a small decrement in how close to threshold you ride will really extend that duration, hours in some cases.
So on that, we're putting together... but the century plan, you could sit century, but we lump those together with Grand Fondo and gravel.
And gravel.
We were just talking about this yesterday that, excuse me, I'm dying here. Okay, I'm back. The Century Plan, we should probably rename that because that's kind of in the last few years gone out of style.
Term's not in favor anymore.
Yeah, Century is now Grand Fondo, really. Rather than having a specific, like, this is 100K or 100 miles, it's just called a Grand Fondo. And gravel racing, almost all the time, is very, very similar to a Century, except it's just on wider tires, right?
Yeah,
so that, it's like you said, Chad, it's going to be predominantly sweet spot. There's not like attacks. Maybe someone does attack you want to climb in a Grand Fondo, but the next group will come up in a second, and you'll probably come right back up. All the Grand Fondos and Centuries I've done in breakaway, or not breakaways, gravel races, there's always so many groups, right? They're just group after group after group. There's not like there's one main group and then you get dropped from that like in a road race. And you're like, ooh, I have to solo for 80 miles now.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty infrequent occurrence that you have to attack during a Grand Fondo or cover attacks. I mean, it may happen now and again, but it's not something you're going to have to face several times over the course of that event.
You see one person go up the road and you're like, okay, have fun. Right?
See you soon, probably.
Yeah, exactly.
Granted, there's also different ways to race this as well, right? It's not just single, it's not just laid out. You may go into this knowing that you're going to be a person that's going to be attacking, chasing, that sort of stuff.
That's a good point, because if you're doing like Belgian Waffle, which is road gravel, but it's like a race, and you're racing for like the top spot, then I would just call it a road race.
Yeah, I'm hesitant to call that one a gravel race.
You can have road races that happen to be called gravel, but if you're going for top 10 overall, completely different. Then it's a road race.
It's a road race, yeah.
But if you're going for 500 out of 2,000, it's not a road race.
It doesn't have to be Belgian Waffle Ride. It could be any race that you're doing. If those demands are similar to that, or at least how you're planning to race it, that's what's really important there. That said, it's important to be realistic with that, because like in my mind, or in our minds, we may picture ourselves being the person that's like animating a race and going for a win. But in reality, there's probably very few folks that can actually do that at a race, right? If you happen to be within that slice, then hopefully, train for that specific way you're going to race it. But otherwise, it's probably better to just have a more, I guess, conservative approach, in the sense that you're preparing for the fallback plan, because chances are the pace mixed with the course is going to force you to just race it in a specific way.
Yeah, there's a really vast distinction between racing a course and surviving a course. And I don't want to paint survival as something that's an act of desperation. We're not talking about people just barely finishing. We're talking about people completing it at a steady pace. So survival is probably not the right word, but it kind of hints at what I'm after. Yeah,
totally. I think that the next bit is kind of one of the, I guess but other than triathlon, it's one of the last ones where we talk about like kind of that survival, or kind of like getting brought down to like your, whatever your pace is for all day. And that's cross-country marathon. So we see this like Epic Rides races, or, any like Leadville, something like that, where it's a longer race. And in those scenarios, you do definitely have situations where, once again, you have your course, but then you have to look at how you're going to race it. And chances are those two are going to meet in the middle somewhere, and you're just going to, like Leadville, it brings you to your knees, and eventually you make it across that line, right?
Yeah. The longer the event is, the less explosive or varied it can be. It's just kind of the nature of it.
I think a good example is in triathlon, where there's a lot more people who can race a sprint, where in the middle of a sprint, you might attack someone during the bike or during the run. Even less for an Olympic. I've attacked people on the run in Olympic.
Sure.
But then in half, that goes maybe the last minute, right?
Attacks don't really look like attacks.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't.
In Ironman, even in the pro field, where they can actually race an Ironman, it's so exciting if it happens in a race, because you don't really see it very often. And in the bike, you can't even tell if it's an attack. But on the run, there's like every attack on the run is almost famous, because there's so few, and they call it, and there's books written about it, and there's pictures. So that's where we're kind of just seeing the point of you're just trying to do a maximum steady state for the entire event, and that's where XCM, cross country marathon, right? Maximum steady state. The Keegan Swensons, they're racing and attacking, but everyone else is just.
Yeah,
a survival is like, I agree. Survival's not the best word.
In those cases, I think it might actually be.
When we did it, some of those.
That's where I'm going with that. It was full on survival.
When you get away from that a little bit is when you get into shorter events, really, like when the duration isn't as long. So something like cross country Olympic or cyclocross, they actually have pretty similar demands. Interestingly, I think that with cyclocross, when you see the top level pros and how they race cyclocross, it's a bit different than what the most of us have. We've talked about this before. We raced Cross Vegas, and so did Keegan Swenson, and we talked all about it. And we talked about, you can hear that in previous episodes where we kind of saw a big difference in terms of how he put out his power versus us. His was much more stable than ours, but the tide was constantly high. With that said, it's still, relatively speaking, these disciplines are very surgy, like cross-country Olympic and cyclocross.
Even those can be survival. I think it's more of if the pace, like the competitive pace is below your all-out pace, then it's like not survival. Yeah. Like a cross race, it starts out, you're in the lead group, and you're like, ooh, I've got 20 extra watts in here. Yeah. Then it gets exciting. Yeah. Totally. I've been in that group, and you're like, there's no extra watts.
Yeah.
And then you just like you just hold on and
you're just trying.
You hope.
That's it. If you're at the end of the rope, you're not racing. You are surviving. So it is really a spectrum. I mean, race where you really get after it and you have a chance at faring quite well, and survival, and then everything that falls in between.
I'm just saying, a lot of the times you can't control it because it's your competition.
Totally.
Or how they look, Carson City, everyone starts out at 350 watts and at a 5-hour day, and you're like, what? This isn't.
What is going on?
What is going on?
It's not sustainable. That's for darn sure. With cross-country Olympic, we in this situation, the specialty plans with TrainerRoad are branded very specifically for the events that you'd be doing. We have a cross-country Olympic plan and we have a cyclocross plan, and they really focused on your ability to punch hard and then hold it and then repeat that sort of stuff. So it's not just like a sprint as hard as you can for 3 seconds and then sit back and rest and sprint again. It's more about punching really high into that VO2 range or even above, and then holding that for as long as you can, then repeating those sort of things. So that's where it's really tricky, but that's what those plans try to address. Whereas, and sorry about jumping back here, the cross-country marathon plan is much more about steady power, but your ability to also deal with those spikes within that steady power.
I see some of those are just less frequent.
And that's just because the nature of mountain biking, you always come across little points of terrain where it's really steep little thing, but then you have to stay steady thereafter. So for a race like Leadville, though, you may end up racing it very much like a road race, and there's not as many short, steep little spikes.
I wouldn't call it a road race. I'd call it more of a gravel race.
Sure, yeah.
Because you're not doing attacks or sprinting or surging.
What specialty plan, after having done it, since you did it personally, you would do the Century plan?
That's why I think we should actually rename them Century to Gran Fondo Gravel, because it's directly in there. And two, as we go through all these, we're all of these linked to specialty plans we're going through right now.
Yep.
But one thing, I think we've already mentioned this, but just because it says something on the name doesn't mean if you know a race is going to be more like one of these things, these energy systems, you can totally go over. So actually, cross-country marathon and Gran Fondo, cross-country marathon has a little more spiky stuff. So if you have a little more spikes in your Gran Fondo, maybe you do cross-country marathon.
Right.
And you don't have to overthink it that much. If you just get into a specialty plan and start looking at the workouts, you'll see. I mean, if you get used to looking at power files and you see what those efforts look like, especially when you smooth them down a little bit, you can look at workouts that replicate those exact demands.
Yeah, it's the scary ones. You can tell. They're really high. That's people
totally
know those ones hurt. But
just hard punches, and then the stuff that follows is often right up next to that FTP line. So
that's hard. But it's good.
Oh, yeah,
it makes
it
it
is.
fast.
But, this is why we gradually build over the course of weeks and months to be able to do.
You get the side note, but I'm like Abbott's, which is sweet spot with attacks. I've noticed after doing almost a year of sweet spot, coming in and adding those little attacks destroyed me.
Yeah.
Destroyed me. And that's knowing how I've trained over the last year, that's to be expected, right?
Sure.
And then also, I think I have, I forget what it is, but it's almost the same workout, but instead of sweet spot, it's threshold. I'm actually scared of that one.
Yeah, and that's why those are sprinkled in there in the base plan. We're trying to at least maintain some level of sharpness in an energy system that otherwise goes unnoticed and unmaintained. So if you're just doing sweet spot all the time, you could physiologically still have something there. Maybe you're predisposed. Maybe you're finding that explosiveness elsewhere. Maybe you run or do something else. But if you don't address it, it does go away.
but it should come back quickly, right? Compared to other energy systems, if I've got this really good.
Yeah, I mean, it's just
base.
a neuromuscular burst. So it's really more about brain communication to muscle, so neuromuscular communication. So it's not a hard thing to dredge back up. And really, unless you're completely overreached within the interval, you should be able to fire those out almost any time.
I can fire them fine. I can hit the spike.
It's recovering after them.
The quote recovery.
Because you're working at a high level. I mean, it's just hard to settle back in after a hard effort like that, to settle back into something that's already really close to the height of what you can sustain. That's a tall order, regardless.
I think a lot of it too is my mental ability because I'm not used to it. So mentally, I hit those and I'm like, this feels so much harder than just being at 90%.
Yeah, but a bit of familiarization with that over the course of a couple of weeks of having one of those workouts per week, and that starts to change.
Yeah, and whenever you're racing or anything else, I've never, you never get to tell a person, I don't like doing these sort of spikes. Please don't.
Please not do that.
That doesn't really work.
The opposite works too, though. If you're used to them and it happens, and then people start getting dropped off.
It's great.
Have you ever been dropped off a group and then you notice, like you have like a 4-second gap, and then you notice they are suddenly slowed down to what your pace is?
Yeah.
Oh, it happens all the time.
And I'm like, if I could have waited 4 more seconds, they slowed down, but you can't get on because there's the
tiny gap and it can't be closed.
And you're actually putting on more power because you're in the wind now. But that 4-second gap.
That's a hugely viable tactic. I mean, if you look at any cross race, any World Cup cross race over the last 2 months, watch Vanderpool. He does exactly that. Works hard enough and long enough to open up a gap, and then that gap usually stays
the same.
I mean, that's it. You just have to get that and then keep on working as hard as everybody behind you, and it plays out if you have the fitness to sustain it, and he clearly does.
And that happens in mountain biking a lot too, right?
Nonstop, yeah.
Nonstop.
Yeah, it's not like it's very rare that this person is just out and out. Well, first of all, if they are just faster than you, then you don't race that person. They go away from you, right? So the people that you are racing with, it always boils down to the fact that they held on for just a little bit longer.
But consider this is a very specific domain. We're talking about short power stuff on a course that doesn't really favor group work.
Right.
So in a road race, you put a rider out there dangling in front of the field. Well, we know how that goes. It almost always gets brought back because it's exponentially more work for that single rider or small group of riders to stay away from a field that's cohesive and actually working together and trading work.
Right.
But in mountain biking, the thing that happens too, so there's less of a draft, but if it's wooded, you get there's so many times where I think I've gapped someone huge, but at the end of the race, it was like 15 seconds or 10 seconds. And if they would have known it was 10 seconds, I bet you they would have put out a lot more power.
10 seconds doesn't seem like a lot.
Yeah.
In retrospect, but in the moment, it's really tough.
I'm saying they don't know, so they're not motivated enough because you get out of sight. And
out of
you
sight,
sit
out of
at a
mind.
corner you count to 10. You're like, that's pretty close. But if it's wooded and they can't see you, it might as well be 20 minutes to them.
They never know if they're closing that gap. I mean, and they're flying blind.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what helps. Do you ever have? At Nationals, I think we should go when you go to Nationals. I don't know if you planned that out, but I would love to be able to be on course at spots and give you splits.
Oh, that'd be super helpful.
We should just lie and always be like, 10 seconds.
There are studies about that very thing.
Yeah, right?
And some coaches do it just because it helps.
It helps. Yeah. It's. I feel like, especially like you mentioned in cross-country racing, because of it being tight and line of sight being limited, many times racers just go for a gap. They don't care about time. They just care about getting out of sight, and they just want to disrupt line of sight. And then if that's in place, that's enough. And there are plenty of times where you might be even soloing back, like you had a mechanical or you crashed or something happened, and you're coming back and you're going as hard as you can, but then you always end up kind of settling in at what you choose to be a pace that you can handle. Yeah. And then if you come across the line and it's 10 seconds there, then that really hurts. Because,
but if you just a second where you get a glimpse of your competition, I mean, now you're starting to leverage that psychological end of things, and it's hugely impactful. I mean, think about you're finishing a race, maybe a running race, so you could actually hear someone yelling at you rather than just a blurt of noise every time you roll by. If your coach says, "Oh man, you're falling apart, pick a new sport, you're terrible at this," the impact that would have on you, as opposed to you're almost there, you're killing it. You got 10 seconds on that guy and you're growing that gap.
At Kona, you almost hear me. Almost every person I say, looking strong, looking strong.
Yeah, why not?
They need to hear that.
Yeah.
You do.
One last thing. I'm beating this to a dead horse, but our local crit series, we've got this 4-corner crit. And if you get a out of sight on like one of the backside or like the longer stretches, I swear the whole pace of the chase group goes down so much. It's instantly lower.
Pretty predictable, yeah. Unless you have certain motivated riders who simply won't let that happen. Then it's just a bummer.
That's
how it goes, man. That's how it goes. Some edge cases before we get into triathlon, which triathlon's pretty straightforward, but we'll cover that. Enduro, when you're prepping for enduro, I think most enduro racers put too much emphasis on, I need to have fitness to be on the bike all day. And I'm saying that with like quotes. I see a lot of them worry about that more than they need to worry about, or more than they worry about the thing that matters when you're in the time stages, which is your ability to put out a huge amount of power and then do it again and do it again and do it again in very close proximity.
It's the most anaerobic form of bike racing I think there is, short of maybe track sprinting.
Yeah, and then after that, then you're pedaling along, but you'll, as long as you're putting in the time with your training and then you're out on the bike working on your skills and everything else, because that's key with enduro, you're going to accrue that fitness to be able to be on the bike all day. Don't worry about that. That'll take care of itself there. What really will matter is your ability to put out power directly, one after another in very high amounts. So the gravity plan, we recommend for that, because that's what that really focuses on. Duathlon, you've done duathlon in the past, Chad?
Before we go on that,
Yeah.
could the gravity plan, could you ever do use it as a like an extra hard crit plan, like an extra anaerobic crit plan?
Yeah, I imagine you could sprinkle in some of those workouts. I don't know that I would go that training plan route so much as pluck some workouts from it.
If you wanted to be like really short power.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a high level of aerobic fitness and you just want to touch up your anaerobic side, I can see doing that for 3, 4, 5 weeks.
Because the worry would be you would lose your power at threshold.
Yeah,
and then
it's
you just
going to
get
come
dropped.
at the expense of some of your aerobic fitness. Yeah.
Duathlon. Would you just recommend following tri workouts and then omitting the swim?
Yeah. In the to fill that void, since we don't actually have dedicated duathlon plans, it kind of is that simple. I mean, it does free up some extra workout slots, which you can fill if you decide you need to focus a little more on your running, a little more on your cycling, and you have the if you can actually benefit from that. Just because there's an opening on your schedule doesn't mean you have to fill it with a workout. If you're kind of dragging and you see that I have a swim workout today, maybe I could do an extra run workout. It may not be the best thing in all situations, maybe in very few. But it really is as simple as just omitting the swim workouts and following the plan from that point forward. If when those those swim workouts arise, if you have the energy and the dedicate, or not even dedication, if you just know you can benefit from an additional workout, a run or ride workout, then go ahead and slot it in there.
Yeah. And for triathlon, it's pretty straightforward, right? There's sprint, Olympic, half, and full distance options for that.
Yeah, we get pretty specific with the tri plans.
Some people have asked for ultra distance, so even longer stuff, what they should do. And we usually recommend that they follow the full distance plan.
Yeah, just follow a full distance plan, and maybe in the build up to your race, do some longer workouts. Just extend some of those workouts, because we're just looking for extensive fitness, and if the workouts aren't quite long enough to make you, in terms of physiology, they probably are, but in terms of other things that you encounter when you grow those distances and being on the bike for a long period of time, seeing how your body breaks down on a 3-hour run versus a 4 or 5 hour run, these are things that are worth knowing.
Yeah, those 4 or 5 hour runs too, this goes without saying, but don't jump into those. Those are incredible beasts. But the people who do them and do them well, I've known people who do them every weekend.
Yeah.
They go incredibly slow.
Yeah.
It's this incredibly slow pace.
You're just trying to last. You're just trying to, you need to be strong enough to get through, robust enough.
It's almost, robust enough is the right way to say it, because aerobically, to me, it's almost more enjoyable than a 2.5, than a marathon.
Yeah.
Not that I've gone super long, but because you're in zone 1 the entire time.
Right.
So you're in this you can listen to a book, you can kind of look around and enjoy stuff. You just have to keep going.
Yeah.
Where in a marathon, you're on that tempo high end,
with that long
the whole
stuff,
thing hurts.
There's a huge fitness component, clearly, but it's really about durability. How long can you postpone breaking down?
Yeah.
And fueling. And two, we'll cover this, I don't know if this is today or not, but that is the case, I think, for more of a fat adapted athlete. When you're doing these ultras,
it's the strongest case for it, in my opinion.
You're doing a 50-mile run after you did a 200-mile bike.
Yeah. Not to mention the swim.
Yeah, strongest case, right?
Yep.
I would, we've talked about this, I think I would totally go fat adapted in that situation.
I would absolutely give it a shot for sure.
I'd try it, right.
Yeah.
Makes perfect sense.
Let's cover some key events, I guess some big notable ones. So we talked about Leadville. The ideal path that we discussed for that, when once again, we're just talking about, we'll run through the 3 phases: sweet spot base, sustain power build, and century plan, right, Nate? Yep. That's what you would do.
Maybe general build.
Yeah, maybe that. Yeah. Yeah.
One of the, or that. I say just general build to mix it up a little bit, because
and maybe you find that you're very good at really long stuff, and the general build might fortify some weaknesses, perhaps.
Yeah.
You know, so you kind of have to weigh those options. That's how you would pick
for sure.
that, right? Dirty Kanza. That's a commonly asked question on that one. First of all, that's really gnarly. Are you going to do that, Nate? Some people have been asking. Like, not this year, but I mean, like, you kind of hinted at it in a previous podcast.
So if I can figure out my health issues, 100%, I'll do it.
Okay, cool. So
you guys come and support me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just support me. You don't have to do
I
it.
don't want
Suggest
to.
it the right week. I might actually do it with you.
Really?
Ooh.
I don't know. It's,
Whoa.
like I said, in the right week.
Isn't there like a Pico, like a
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. There we go.
15-mile one?
Yeah.
That sounds more.
But not the crazy one. What's the regular distance?
DKXL is 350.
No.
Dirty Cans is 200.
Okay.
Yeah. They also have 100.
They do have 100.
They have other options too, but yeah.
You do the 100?
Sure.
No, do the
yeah,
200
why
with
not?
me.
I mean, 100.
Just do the 200 with me.
100 miles. That's just a weekend ride.
I'll still support you guys.
It's going to be like the muddiest.
Yeah,
windiest day.
exactly. I could see that. Yeah, that's what I'm fearing. So with Dirty Kanza, though, sustained power build is probably what you should do.
Yeah.
I know there are a lot of rolling hills. I get that.
It's
but
still very sustained.
It's sustained in terms of think of what your power should be doing over those. And we looked at that with Best Bike Split on and Jeff Kabush when we talked about his efforts on the podcast on Dirty Kanza. You can search that one as well. It was really consistent power, like extremely consistent. The difference between normalized and average power were like,
and even lower level riders, when you hit it on something like that, a course that's that long, that has rolling hills, what are you doing? Maybe 80, 85, maybe 90% of threshold. You're not going.
I think it's the same as Leadville.
Yep. Yeah. I think the same plans. Would be the best way to do that.
Hugely similar demands, so same trajectory.
For most Epic Rides courses, I would absolutely recommend cross-country marathon and then general build or sustained build, depending on the course. But for like Carson City Off-Road, for example, sustained build wouldn't serve you poorly because they're really long climbs. For something like...
this goes... You just said perfect thing, right? So, and I want people to get this because we get this question a lot.
Cool.
You know, Carson City starts out with a 40-minute climb, right? So you're thinking sustained power because you're going to climb for 40 minutes.
Yep.
If Carson City started out with the first 30 minutes were full of 4-minute climbs, you would probably change like a 4-minute climb and then a descent and a 4-minute climb. You would probably do general build then, correct?
Yep, absolutely.
And that is a key thing that people need to understand. That just because like sustained 40K TT easy, right? To think of.
Makes sense.
But just what you said, like how is this course and how are you going to race this course?
What are the predominant demands of the course? I mean,
or where I'm going to be competitive and stuff. And if Jonathan knows he wants to win one of those races and it's going to have a whole bunch of 4-minute climbs in the beginning, he might even do after general build, he might even do rolling road race or something like that. Even though it doesn't say marathon.
Totally.
Or stick with the marathon and just cherry pick some of those workouts. So such that once a week you're facing those specific demands and actually seeing, I can do this. This is I can do this, and then the rest of my week doesn't suffer severely as a consequence.
And you could do that with TrainerRoad's calendar.
I was just going to say that it's so easy to do, right? If you're doing something like Bentonville, the Oz Trails off-road for Epic Rides, that's the other end of the spectrum. That one is like constant. It's like a roller coaster.
Super surgy.
Just nonstop
Did you pre-ride
rollers.
that?
I did, yeah.
Is it fun? Flowy?
It's amazingly fun.
I think I would be pretty
You
good
would
at
love that course.
Is it, how technical is it?
Very non-technical, relatively speaking.
Yeah, I think in general, all mountain bike courses should be required to be fun and flowy.
Of course, right?
And then there's you can do the marathon ones and long stuff, but everything else should just be flowy.
Yeah.
Sometimes they put in these angles where it's not...
The trails are incredible there. I'm actually making a trip out there, not for the race, but making a trip out there this year just to go ride it because I like it so much.
Is that the Walmart people who did that?
Yeah,
Can you tell the side note? I'm sorry, I'm distracting, but I want to tell people about this because people don't understand.
It's like Walmart is based out of this town, Bentonville, Arkansas, right? That's where their headquarters are. And they wanted people to come to their headquarters. That's where Sam Walton started Walmart, the whole thing. But they wanted people to come to their headquarters, but it was this tiny little town. And they had this problem where basically they would, if a company, so if you look at it like a huge chunk of Fortune 500 companies are set in Bentonville because of their partnerships with Walmart, but their employees don't live there. Or they didn't for a long time. And they just flew in for the week. They would work, then they'd fly back home because they're like, oh no, Bentonville is a tiny little town in Arkansas. I don't want to go there. But so what they did is they basically said, we're going to invest a huge amount of money, the Walton Foundation and plenty of other resources, into making it like the ideal place to live. And especially for people that like outdoor active lifestyles, because they figured those are like the stars in companies and those sort of people. So that's what they want them to be there. So basically it's like
all the listeners to this podcast.
Exactly.
Superstars.
So they made this big bet on basically like, we're just going to make this the best place to be an active person and live. and that will then bring more people, and it totally has worked. But so all the trails that you see, they have like, it's not like you kind of hack in a trail with a pickaxe. Then after that, hopefully it gets approved by a trail organization, like what happens in many places. They have trail companies that are specifically, they are hired to build trail. They know how to build trail. They're engineers. They do incredible work on these things. And the trails are like a masterpiece. And right from the town square, there's like single track that leaves out of the town square. It's like amazing.
Do you know how much money they spend on professional trail building?
Oh, it's a lot. Well into millions and millions and millions.
Yeah.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And it's so cool. And the town, it's like the little town square, you feel like you've jumped back in time. And then there's like amazing restaurants, It's like a hidden gem. It's so cool. And the topography, but the topography there is like basically like just like if you were like a 30,000 foot view, it's like somebody kind of like peppered the ground and there were like small detentions everywhere, right? So they call them haulers, but basically it's like little rises of, 50 or like 30 to 100 feet. 100 feet would be the tall ones. So the course is single track that just goes over those non-stop. So it's like fun coming down. It's cool.
The people who build trails are like the heroes of mountain biking.
Yeah.
That being said, the professionals who have extra money to even do it, like,
it's amazing,
for better equipment and better features, everyone's got to try that once, because I don't want to knock the people that do it for free, because we wouldn't survive in sport without them.
Right.
But do have a chance to do it where people have this big budget and a
cool.
whole team working full time.
The trails just like they don't allow you to stop grinning. Like the whole time you're riding, you're like, oh, that's so much fun. It's really cool. So yeah, if you're doing something like that though, then it really depends on kind of, you might want to shore up your weaknesses, but that one, I would definitely do rolling road race for that one. Because that's going to be working on a little bit of the more, the repeating efforts that you might put out.
Sure.
And I wouldn't do sustain for darn sure.
Not even like crit though? Is it too?
You could do that.
How long are the climbs?
I think that the longest climb that I did there on the course was probably somewhere around 1.5 minutes.
So I would think then
short.
Even shorter than
and
rolling.
You can do that.
Yeah, you could do cyclocross or criterium.
Cross-country Olympic. Yeah. Really, it comes down to how you plan to race it, because...
Yeah, cross-country Olympic.
And I feel like the tricky part is if you go into it with a crit plan approach, it's going to be like really hard, like... I guess that if you plan on surging really hard on those climbs, that isn't going to last long.
Yeah. So again, we're not talking the demands of the course. We're talking about the demands you're going to ask of your body, or you're going to impose on your body.
Yep. Yeah. So that's why I would err toward the side of the more rolling road race side, because hopefully you're going to smooth those out instead of just jam as hard as you can on each one.
This goes back to what we talked about last week, Chad, where maybe the high density on-offs, 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off at 120, or maybe growing that up to 130. You could put that progression into your plan. Perfect. If you know you're going to do a race that's just like this, because I would think, Jonathan, if you could pace those where over 20, I think I just did Taylor, it's 20 minutes of those, or Taylor -2 is 14 minutes, 20 minutes of those in a row. Yeah. If you could pace that evenly, you would go so much faster than going all out for the first four, and then less and less and less and less, and then just surviving the last.
Like Keegan Swenson won that one this year. He got it because he chose to throw down a really hard breakaway, but then thereafter his power was extremely consistent. Smooth. And he basically just went for the get out of sight thing, and then after that was just trying to be as smooth as he could.
Yeah. Did he hold the same gap, do you know?
I think that he did. He crashed really hard on a bridge. It was really slippery. And then and I think he got a little panicked, and that's when things got down, but then he ended up stretching it. But yeah, I think he more or less managed it. So as some other events that would be popular that we see, BC Bike Race this is the mountain bike side of things. The last mountain bike one we'll talk about, but stage racing, a lot of people ask, like, since it's a stage race, do we just throw out everything that we talked about now? And the answer is no. You still train the same way for those demands. You'll want to make sure that you can do hard days back to back. So a handy thing that you can do, and try to make this so that it's not really close to the event, so you don't suffer any consequences that could throw off your training. But as you're going through the base or the build phase, look at things and maybe try stacking those workouts where you may have an easy day in between. Try stacking it back to back to see what your body does and how it recovers from something like that. That's what I would recommend. Chad, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I kind of lost focus here for a second. Someone said that my mic wasn't sounding.
You're right. Good. But we got it. Check it live after the fact, or check it after the fact when it's archived, and it'll be all taken care of, folks.
Are you still off for the live?
No, we're good.
Okay,
so
good.
When we talk about Another one that we see, Fred Witten Sportif. That one, a lot of people ask about that one in the UK. And a lot of you ask about a whole bunch of different races and common ones. But hopefully the principles that we've been able to give you, you can apply to basically look at what's the terrain that the course is held on, and then how am I going to race that terrain? And then look at a training plan that goes after that. Yep, absolutely. All right. Now that we know which plans we'd select, let's go into how we'd adjust them a bit. From Max, he says, hi at TrainerRoad, as there were some questions lately of which plans to repeat or double up on when your A event is quite a while in the future. I would like your comments on the other side of the spectrum. I'm preparing for a long distance triathlon with the start of March. And he says, due to life circumstances, I just started structured training in mid-November. I carried some fitness, but jumped back to a base plan. And he says that he went to our sweet spot-based low-volume plan, and he says he's just adding on 2 to 3 outside rides a week. So he says, with 9 weeks before the event, should I look toward a specialty plan or continue with a build plan to make the most of the time? Keep the good work. So I guess outside of this, maybe the best way, Chad, that you would recommend that people shorten a plan if they don't have enough time to finish the whole thing.
Yeah, and it always comes back to what level of fitness you're bringing to the table. So if you have a high level of fitness, you have much more flexibility than if you don't. So if you're starting with the basics, you have to build the basics before you layer anything on top of it. I mean, that's our approach. We pyramidize, however you want to refer to it. But until the more rudimentary or fundamental forms of fitness are in place, it's really hard to build anything on top of that and expect it to be the sort of fitness you actually want.
Mm-hmm. So in this case, general build. So I'm going to get not general build, but build before.
Just maintain the sequence. You're not ever going to see specialty inside of 9 weeks. And if you're if you're just barely into sweet spot base, if just into your 12-week base plan, that might be all you get through. And that's a fine place to start. Even then, I wouldn't recommend, unless again you have a high level of fitness or a reasonably high level of fitness, I wouldn't bypass the base phase.
I don't know if this may be a mental thing, but I feel like I've never had a, quote, high level of fitness. You know what I mean? Like looking back after the fact, I was like, oh, I did have one back last February.
It just happens if people race a lot. They're not specifically training for anything, but they're doing a lot of racing. Then maybe they take a couple weeks off and then they come back to it. Do I really need to start at base? Well, maybe not.
That's what I mean of just describing that to people. Like is it a certain watt per kg? But it's really like amount of volume that you have taken into it, right?
Just knowing that your body can handle a fair amount of abuse, that it's capable of doing a fair amount of work and it recovers pretty well from it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Something to add to this too is I think a lot of people misunderstand that you can start racing very early on in your
that's
phases,
absolutely by design. So and this is part of the reason why we don't go the traditional base route, because it cultivates really unidimensional fitness. Mm-hmm. You have a great big aerobic base, not a whole lot you can do with that. But if you start with sweet spot base and the variety that's within the sweet spot base plans, it's not just sweet spot work. There's also some VO2 max work. There's some neuromuscular bursts, and it's varied. It's quite varied with that specific aim. I want people to be able to work through 6 weeks of sweet spot base and go be able to have a pretty good race. Work through another 6 weeks and have an even better type of race, or higher level of performance. Yeah. Work through build and be able to race quite well, and then specialize and be able to race that type of race really well.
Mm-hmm. I almost feel like sweet spot base 2 could almost be renamed to like build prep, or I don't know, something
absolutely
like that.
Is, yeah.
Because it's more of a...
It's like a hybrid build.
Yeah, it's halfway in between. Mm-hmm. It's like, or call it post base.
That I think is a really important 6 weeks. That's the one plan I wish nobody would skip. Even if you bypass sweet spot base 1, please do sweet spot base 2, because what you get over that 6 weeks is a really good cross section of what you need to do a lot of types of races.
Totally. I think in start rate, don't worry about starting to race too early. Granted, if you're really putting your priority races and stacking them all in and compromising your training because you're trying to race so much, that's one thing. Hopefully you can increase their frequency or really kind of focus it toward your A event. But a common question that people ask is, when can I race? And yeah, you can
Anytime.
start. I've had really, really, really good races and performances in sweet spot base before.
I'm planning on it. Mm-hmm. I got my first.
Oh, I've had.
Yeah, so here's a good example. Mm-hmm. Crit season, I want to do a bunch of crits and get upgrade to 3. Over this summer, it's a long season, right? Mm-hmm. So the first one is going to be right at like kind of the end of sweet spot base 2. Mm-hmm. But I think it's going to be, I'll have enough fitness to do great in it in sweet spot, or I don't know. If there's fitness, then there's handling tactics. So there are two different things. Yeah. But my fitness should be at a level, and my punchiness should be good by then, based on the amount of workouts I'm going to do it before.
Absolutely.
So just to your point, you should be able to race that. And if you have a long season, if I had built it up where I was just ending or starting specialty now, it could be harder for me to maintain that and do rebuilds and stuff all the way through till July or August.
Oh yeah.
I did not like myself.
It's get pretty tricky.
Yeah.
Especially, and we talked about this a lot of times. You maintain or you build yourself to a high level of fitness. The last thing you want to do is watch it slip away. So you do everything you can to hang on to as much of it as you can.
And you just
in
do
the
more
process,
when it slips.
You end up hobbling yourself. It's not ideal.
Could you ever do 2 specialties back to back? Specialty is a little bit easier than that.
I don't see why not, especially if they have overlapping demands. I wouldn't go from one end of the spectrum to the other. Like 40K TT to criterium racing. Although there's even a case for that. Yeah.
What though if I did? This is crazy. But what if I did criterium and then I just did criterium again? And maybe didn't even change my FTP. I like my fitness. I'm like, it's not too much.
Yeah. I mean, you'd just be looking at sustaining, or maybe
I would sustain. That's the whole idea of sustain.
Yeah, if that's all you're after,
to be able to race kind of fresh every weekend.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to improve, you got to do one of two things. You have to escalate the training load or stress score, or you have to increase your FTP. Ideally, you do a bit of both.
And in my personal experience, what I've found, which is really tough about that approach, is that if I follow the specialty plan through completion, in most cases, it's brought me to a point where I'm peaked, right? That's the whole goal of it.
Yeah.
And it gets hard to maintain that. There's it's difficult.
It does, but over the years you can ride that train for a longer and longer duration.
That's the key. Over the years, you accrue the experience to understand how your body is responding.
Understand it, and physiologically, it's just more capable, more robust. To use that word again.
This is off the cuff, but what I'm thinking is by not increasing my FTP and redoing it again, like in season, you always want to be kind of fresh for those weekend races. Yep. And so that would I would put less stress on my system during the week because it's not an increase in stress.
I think that's actually a really good fit for a race-packed season.
Yeah, and even if more than 8 weeks.
If that race pack just means weekends. It doesn't have to be a Tuesday night and a weekend onslaught. It can just be you want to do enough to touch it up over the course of the week, be fresh on the weekends, and repeat.
A Tuesday night and a weekend. Because some of these
that's almost your training plan right
exactly,
there.
Right? Then it's maybe a Thursday, but even that Thursday is probably not very hard.
I don't know that I would do any intensity outside of that. A couple times a week is enough. And you start,
3 whole
start dipping into that third, you see
tough.
hugely diminished returns, if you see returns at all. And they're just better ways to spend that time. Yeah. You can do, I mean, you can work on skills, you can work on flexibility, mobility, you can work on just extra rest, easy miles, whatever.
Yeah. 2 points I want to nail home that you already said, but I just really want to make sure people understand is when you're doing that sort of approach, it can be tricky to maintain. There are 2 things that time provides in this case is a lot of you become a more robust athlete. You have a more substantial aerobic base to pull from, so then you can kind of keep the tide higher, so to speak. But then you also learn to understand the signals that your body gives you, because those 2 things are really important to keep track of. Otherwise, you can find yourself in a situation, especially because let's say you do well in one of these races, and then you're just like, bring every race to me. Because like after you do well in one race, you're just like, I'm starting for races.
As the years,
you've said this before. You put on your calendar. You're like, ooh, what races? Ooh, this is a 6-hour drive. I could make this.
Yeah. You start doing it, and then the tricky part is managing your excitement levels in that respect, and kind of going, if I do this, it might push me over a little too far.
Yeah, as the years pile up, especially if you've been consistent or reasonably so over the course of those years, you get your fitness base grows and your knowledge base grows. And between those 2 things, you learn a lot about yourself as an athlete, and you become a more capable athlete on both levels. And I mean, there's a reason why endurance athletes are so competitive beyond 35 years of age, up to 55, 60 years of age. It's because some of these adaptations take place over the course of multiple years. I mean, some of these fiber type transitions that we've touched on in the past aren't quick occurrences. They take literally years.
Yeah, that's how it goes. Let's go into Matt's question. He's talking about time off and how you adjust. Another common question we have. He says, this is my first off-season attempting to do structured training throughout the winter. I live in Germany, and my training goals are centered on fitness and improving my personal performance at sportives such as the Tour de Flanders, Liège-Bastogne-Liège, and the classic alpine climbs in the summer. That sounds like some good races to pick from, man. He says, my question is on fitting winter sports into the training plan. This winter, I'd like to know how to fit my ski trips into a phase, apropos for Chad and I.
I know why you guys
highly.
Yeah, Chad and I are going to Powder Creek Lodge.
Opportunity to brag a bit.
Ski trip tomorrow.
Yeah.
Tomorrow.
Yeah, 2 podcast listeners. Thank you so very much to the Peachels and Powder Creek Lodge.
Powder Creek Lodge.
We're excited to go to it.
I'm sure we're going to talk plenty about about it afterward too.
Oh yeah, you'll get sick of us talking about it. So
I'm already sick of it.
especially if I come out of it with the fitness I think I'm going to gain.
Or alive too. Yeah, that's a good thing.
Yeah,
hopefully Chad comes out alive.
I prefer.
He says, should I try to fit all the workouts in consecutively before I leave on a 5-day trip and then squeeze the next week's together in the remaining days of the following week? Or should I consider my days on the mountain a replacement for the workouts I miss? Would it be better to pause the plan altogether and just start again at the workout I left off on beforehand? Says the Tour of Flanders Sportive is on the 6th of April, and I'd love to be setting personal bests on the Koppenberg and Potterberg this year.
Should we step through each one of those and pick them apart?
Let's do it. I like it. So I guess the first one that he asks is, should he basically 5 days that he's going to miss of training, should he try to pepper those into the existing plan and just try to fit it all into the weeks in front and back?
Yeah. So if he's talking about taking all of his intensity workouts or quality workouts and stacking them end to end over 5 days, I say go for it if you're going to recover for 2 weeks afterward.
Yeah.
And I don't think you are. And even then, it's a questionable approach. So this just goes back to the tried and true, make your hard days hard, easy days easy, and this flies directly in the face of that. So
that would be, sorry, that first situation, so it's clear, that would almost be like a training camp where you're going to be doing like
it fully is
8 days of extremely hard workouts in a row.
Yeah.
This is going to smash you to the ground.
You have to have a body that can withstand that, and
the recovery period after.
Yeah, and the recovery period afterwards has to be substantial. I mean, that's a lot of damage you're doing to those muscles, to your endocrine system, and it takes a while for the body to bounce back from that.
And what we're talking about, I guess, in this case is, 5 days of very, I should say, physically demanding work that he's going to be doing, because a ski trip like that, it isn't like he's sipping Mai Tais on the beach.
Yeah, see, that's...
So you want to consider the demands that you have. Like, even if it's a work trip and you're not doing something physical, it's probably not recuperative, right?
Still stress of some form.
Yeah, so consider that. Even though you're not on the bike, you're still accruing stress in some respect, most likely, unless it's a full-on vacation. And in that case, we've talked about that before. You can try to squeeze it in and kind of do a training camp because you know that you're going to have time to just fully recover thereafter.
And try not to fall into the trap of seeing workouts as boxes you need to tick off the list. It's not about getting them done. It's about benefiting from them, about reaping greater performance capabilities. And you're not going to do that if all you do is bury yourself in fatigue and then go pile more fatigue on top of it over the course of a ski trip.
Yeah. So the other thing that he says, should I consider my days on the mountain a replacement for the workouts I miss? This is where it's tricky too, because like Chad and I, we're going backcountry skiing. We're going to be doing a ton of aerobically, I guess we're going to be building our aerobic fitness, right?
Really, yeah.
But it isn't necessarily making us faster cyclists. In fact, I'd argue that it
is. It's laying foundation for us to become faster cyclists, but that's going to come with different, more specific training afterward. It's not going to happen over the course of this, but what we glean or what we gain from this 5 days or 7 days in our case is potentially really beneficial.
Is that a humble brag?
I think Chad's going to do his two on
very
one
not
off.
a brag.
I think the single track 6 thing where he alternated, I think.
I'm going to play it by ear. I'm going to see how my body feels. This isn't a race. I'm not committed to every single day of skiing. If I feel lousy one day, I'm either going to trim the day or skip it or whatever. I'll take it as it comes.
Smart.
But the fact is, we stand to gain a lot from this if we do it right. And if we come back and we give ourselves a little bit of a break before we dive headlong into the hard stuff, which is going to be hard not to do considering we have 24 hours of Pueblo just around the corner.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, the analogy for other people, what I think about this is you see a runner or a swimmer come in to start cycling. At first, they're horrible, but their improvement is extremely fast.
Steeper learning curve.
Yep. So as they specialize their aerobic fitness more into cycling, they get really good really fast. Actually, Justin Rossi, he's a good example of this. He was a Division I collegiate swimmer, right?
Really good.
Yep.
And then I remember he was in a race with me and he attacked us off the front, dropped us all. But I think it was like a year or maybe it was a year and he was a Cat 1 racer, but he wasn't amazing. He wasn't a Cat 1 racer on his first day.
I just remember I used to be able to smoke that guy. Yeah. And now I can't. He can ride me off his wheel.
Yeah. That's how it works.
That's what he's second at TT Nationals by, what did he do? 370 watts for an hour and super aero. Yeah. It's pretty good. On a TT bike.
No, he's a good athlete. He's a good aerobic athlete or endurance.
But
athlete.
I'm just saying, so you can't. Just to Matt's question, you can't think that you're going to go do skiing for 6 weeks and then come back and your FTP is going to be higher.
Right. It doesn't work.
That's your point.
Really unlikely.
Yep.
Yeah.
And now the last thing that he poses, would it be better to pause the plan altogether and start again at the workout I left off on? That's the approach that I'm taking. On our calendar, I basically pushed the week down of training. So then I'm going to leave off today at one point, and then I'm going to pick up.
And you're well invested into your training process. I, on the other hand, I'm like the opposite end of that in that I've only done a couple workouts. So even if that was my first workout of the or first week of a plan, and then I go do this and I come back, I probably wouldn't jump back into the second week. I'd probably just start anew. And I'd probably do that same approach even if I were a few weeks into a plan. Yeah. Just because you're building on something, I'm kind of starting from scratch.
It's also, I think, your age, how quickly you lose fitness, and what your recoverability is.
Huge concerns.
I believe Jonathan, being younger, probably recovers better than you do.
Sure.
I would say the thing that I would do is repeat that same week. So even though you have the week off, make sure you come back rested.
Sure.
A lot of times too, like the day you get back from vacation, I do a workout.
Super motivated. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it'll be different considering how physically taxing this is.
Yeah.
But when I got like on a business trip or something where you can't do a heck of a lot, you come back and man, you're just super eager to get back at it. Yeah. It's usually a terrible workout too.
It is. But just repeating that same week, it's a little bit more humane. And then too, when you get in that, like, if I lost something or not, like right away, or if I need to take more rest. Because you do that first workout that you did 2 weeks ago and you can't get through it, you're like, ooh, I need more rest.
Yeah.
Or I need to go back maybe 2 weeks in the plan.
Yeah. Want to get into Vaughn's question? I feel like we covered the adjusting pretty well, right?
Oh, yeah.
Vaughn says, I'm using the TrainerRoad Ironman training plan for my third Ironman in July for a UK event. Kudos to you, Vaughn. 3 Ironmans. That's quite the achievement. Obviously, my indoor sessions will be using watts to measure my power, but I haven't got a power meter to use on outdoor rides. So he says, how can I try and measure my training without a power meter? Do I use heart rate, RPE, or speed? So this is another common question, and perhaps some misunderstanding definitely, I would say, lies around this one as well. So I had this exact problem. I had a power meter on my bike, but when we went to state champs for TT Nats, as soon as I'm getting on there, I calibrate my power meter and then it said calibration error. And then my power meter was bricked. Just did not work, right?
On the line.
On the line is the worst possible.
And a lot of people come from a situation where they have, a trainer, and whether they're using virtual power, actual power from a trainer, that they have that information out indoors, but they don't have the dollars or maybe the interest, or don't want to dedicate those resources to purchasing an outdoor power meter. So this is a pretty common situation. But recognize that training indoors with power, there's a pithy little phrase that gets thrown around quite a lot, is that power calibrates RPE, RPE modulates power, which is simply to say that the more you train with power, the more you can associate certain power outputs with how it affects your body, your rate of perceived exertion. And then when you get out there, you can use that rate of perceived exertion to decide, how hard can I push based on what you learn indoors by staring at those metrics the whole time you're working out.
Yeah.
This helps a lot too when, like for Leadville, switching elevations too. I had no clue. I mean, kind of know. You had a clue about what kind of power. Math. But then once you're riding it and you can feel it, and you've done so many rides where you've been staring at threshold power and you know what that feels like, you're like, this is at Leadville, that would be too much for me because of the long day. But as you change elevations, and same thing too when we go down to sea level, it's the opposite, right?
Yeah.
And the same thing too on flat days to some extent. I mean, you get on the bike and you know what it feels like to ride at threshold, and today it's really hard to ride at threshold. Well, maybe you're too tired to do a threshold workout.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, it's always important to be like kind of tying those two into each other. And environmental factors, like you said, definitely have an effect. And one of them that gets really tricky to ward out there is that fatigue side of things. So when you're indoors, though, the cool part is about training indoors. One of them is the fact that it gets rid of all the variables. So you really get used to that association between
environmental
how hard you're
variables.
pushing. Yeah. How hard you're pushing and then what the number is, right? So you can really kind of figure some things out with that. And I've noticed that it helps you. Like I can pretty accurately guess when I'm riding, like, this is probably this many watts. And if I look down, it's almost always, very close.
You can hone that to a point where it is just spot on. I mean, you can get it within a handful of watts.
I can do that after like 20 minutes. But at the beginning of my workout or at the end of my workout, it's completely different. But in the middle of it, I'm pretty good at that.
Right. Yeah. That's really, whenever anybody asks, like, how should I like structure my workouts if I don't have a power meter? Or
almost
else
always
like
steer them toward RPE.
Same.
RPE informed by power.
Yeah. So we're not a fan of heart rate. We have a whole video on YouTube. I think it's called How Modern Athletes Train, Power Meter, something like that.
Yep.
You can look it up. And that goes, we talk a lot about it, but heart rate, in my opinion, lies to you. And some people say, well, you should always go after your heart rate because then if you're on a Like your heart rate, if you're tired that day, it'll be different. But an example, I do Baxter all the time. Follow me on Strava, Nate Pearson.
Yeah. It's like a drinking game. Nate and
exactly.
Yeah.
I like the variations. So it's a 90-minute aerobic ride. Sometimes I do the 60-minute. That's like my filler workout. I just did it. I think my average heart rate was 154. RPE it actually felt pretty easy. A week later, I did it. It was 135 average heart rate. RPE felt pretty easy. RPE was exactly the same. My heart was just doing something different that day. If I was going based on heart rate, I'd either push harder on the 135 day or go easier on the 154 day.
It's tricky.
Yeah, right?
I still think it's a useful metric for determining internal strain. So what's going on inside your body. You still have to develop trends over time. You can't look at heart rate on a spotty basis. You have to abide by it frequently. I would never recommend training by it because of these very reasons. But I do recommend collecting that data and seeing how that data overlays with other data. It's still useful information. It still says what's going on inside of your body regardless of what you're doing outside.
What's super fun is to look at it, like go back to my 2011 Baxters and see the average power of like 150 watts. And then see the average power of like 200 watts and see the same heart rate. And it's like
overlay year after year. So it can be super fun. It can be super demoralizing too, depending on which direction you're trending.
Right.
But that part is really fun to see. And day to day, to dictate how hard you're pushing in a workout.
So problematic.
Yeah, it really is. Dimitri, he says, "Hey, Chad, John, and Nate. I've been using TrainerRoad for about a year now, but have just started listening to the podcast. I love it and keep up the great work. In episode 45, you briefly discuss using a sauna as a way to acclimatize to hotter temperatures. I recently found out that my YMCA has both a sauna and steam room, and I'd like to incorporate those into my training, maybe for recovery. But I've heard conflicting opinions from different online sources about the benefits of each. I'd like to ask you guys the following questions." He says, 1, outside of acclimatization, are there any performance benefits such as sped up recovery to using a sauna or steam room? We've covered this in depth before, but it's actually, we've been getting a good amount of questions as far as on other questions that he has here, but we're getting a good amount of these.
So we'll gloss over it and do that Cliff's Notes version of it. Basically a lot, and the science keeps showing us that this stuff is actually bearing out. It's not due to some poorly formulated study or people trying to make a quick buck on selling saunas or anything else that would play a part in what's called hyperthermic training. So I haven't come across any reports that show improved recovery per se. It's not like, go do hyperthermic training and you'll recover more quickly, but there are adaptations that take place over the course of acclimatization or acclimation to the heat that do facilitate recovery a bit. So kind of. The reported benefits, and again, there's a fair amount of data to back all of this up, and a particularly good resource on the matter is Rhonda Patrick. So just Google her, YouTube her, and you'll get probably more information than you want. But in terms of how it affects the brain, growth of new brain cells, improved focus, learning, memory, reductions in depression and anxiety. And these, again, are things that have been measured and scoped out pretty intently. What we're probably more concerned with, though, not that that's a bad benefit of hyperthermic training, is the cardiovascular effects. So reduced heart rate, increased blood flow to muscle, which is called perfusion. So better perfusion means a lot of things. For one, if you're getting more oxygen to the muscle, more fuel delivered to the muscle, it means less glycogen use, assuming you're ingesting carbohydrate, but also just oxygen. That also means there's less lactate buildup. It also means there's more blood to the muscle, means more fuel comes in, more waste goes out, more metabolic byproducts make it back into the bloodstream and get recirculated and recycled, et cetera.
This happens while you're in there, or after many times this happens when you're not
These are the benefits of spending consistent time in a sauna. So, and I didn't get into the specifics. I feel like we covered that in past. I mean, if you probably just search on thermal regulation, or I'm not sure.
You'll find it. Yep.
Heat acclimation.
We talked all about
find, it. More specifics. And then actual increases in red blood cell count. So more actual red blood cells, more little guys who carry oxygen to the muscle. And then that's likely due to increases in EPO release at the kidneys? I'm pretty sure it's kidneys.
That's the legal way to do EPO, right?
It is. It actually is. And then from a thermoregulatory perspective, how well your body adapts to, the increased load in heat, you get a higher sweat rate and a higher sweat sensitivity. So you sweat sooner, you sweat more profusely, and in the course of it, you shed less electrolytes. So your body starts to hang on to the stuff that you would normally just ditch more quickly, increase blood plasma volume, and this is what has a big impact on your heart, your reduced heart rate, reduced cardiovascular strain, higher EPO. Because there's, if you think in terms of the EPO, why do the kidneys release EPO? Because plasma volume went up, which means your hematocrit went down, which means EPO is going to try to compensate for that effect. And then just overall improved thermoregulation. You get better at dealing with the heat, both psychologically and physiologically.
These sound like the same benefits that we would get from training in the heat.
Endurance training.
Except not as painful.
Right.
Because John and I have done it. It's
so bad.
See, that's
so bad.
That's the beauty of it. I don't think combining the two makes any sense at all.
It's hard.
It's such a limiter.
It doesn't make sense when you can go into a sauna afterwards and get similar benefits.
Yep.
Yeah,
unless you don't have a sauna.
That's a good point.
That's absolutely true. I mean, you can turn off the fan, but then that might impact your workout. You might not be able to work at a high enough level to actually stimulate.
That's what we said when we say this. You got to do it on an aerobic ride.
Yeah.
But still, that's a good example. When I did backstrap on that, I was like
undertaking.
175 heart rate. It was like pegged.
Yes.
Seriously. But if you have access to a sauna, you do a hard workout, wind yourself up, build up that internal temperature, and then go sit in a sauna. That's it. Just sit. And it's not. It can be pretty uncomfortable, especially initially. It's downright miserable until you start to get used to it. But as you do get used to it, then it's almost a reward for a hard workout.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We have some empty rooms here. We could get a sauna.
I've got one, and I swear by it. I love that thing. In fact, I'm just about to start using it again post ski trip.
Well, check it out. Number 2 says, I've heard that putting legs in cold water speeds up recovery. We've seen that all the time. You see a lot of people do that. Should I skip the sauna or steam room and take a cold shower instead? That's super confusing for people, right? Because like, if heat helps, does cold help? Yeah. So is cold actually good? Ice baths are what we commonly see.
This is a tough one. The research is more contentious and kind of flip-flops. But cold water does reduce inflammation, but is a reduction in inflammation a desirable effect? I mean, do we want that to happen, considering the fact that inflammation is a natural response to muscle damage, which is something we intentionally incur over the course of a hard workout? So why do we want to blunt the effects of our natural body's response to that? I mean, that's the heart of adaptation. We impose a stimulus that the body, in this case, actually gets damaged or receives certain cell signals and it responds. But if we take something out of that mix and don't allow the body to respond like it would, well, what happens to the adaptation? Obviously, it suffers.
Yeah. It's kind of a tricky thing.
I mixed on that. I did see one study, 2018, did cold water immersion right after an Ironman triathlon. So for 10 minutes, they had some athletes jump into a 50-degree Fahrenheit tub, which is 10 degrees Celsius. So it's cold. They measured no physiological benefit. This is a quote, no physiological benefit during recovery from triathlon within 40 hours post-race. So 40 hours later, they still really didn't see anything measurable as a benefit of that cold water immersion.
The thing I do think is
just one study, though,
is it feels good. So like after you do it and you get out,
and it can get your internal body temperature down. I mean, I'm not saying I'm not a fan of them. I'm saying in terms of performance benefit or recovery facilitate enhancement.
That's the difference, because I know those people here listening going, oh, but it makes me feel so good. How could it be bad?
Yeah.
It feels so good.
Yeah, and if we're talking about 10 minutes in it, how big of a blunting effect could that have? And after an Ironman triathlon where you've been out there for anywhere from 8 to 18 hours, depending, or 15, whatever.
Right.
I say celebrate in any way you want to.
Yeah, I'm not going for the next fitness increase. Just take the pain away.
At that point after the race, you're just like,
take it away.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then the studies that do kind of support these cold water immersion, they limit the temperature to somewhere around, I think, 60 degrees Fahrenheit or 15 Celsius. Okay. So it's not super cold water. It's just cold enough.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've seen this used by certain, even race car drivers. I've heard of it used for Le Mans, for example, where it's a relay and where it may be extremely hot. And then what they do is they get out of the car and then they get in an ice bath just to cool their core body temperature down, because they have to get back in the car sometime soon.
That's thermal regulation. That's not performance.
I've wanted that in the middle of races lots.
Yes. I mean, just drinking a cold, just a bottle of ice water versus a bottle of warm water.
So something even if you can get it slushier, and then swallow the ice whole.
Slurry.
That's even better. Yeah, slurry. So if you could swallow a slurry where there's actually ice inside of you, obviously it makes perfect sense, right?
It's even better.
Yep. Yeah, do it and see. You won't need us to tell you.
Dimitri's last temperature related question that he has here is: are there any risks associated with stretching in high temperatures?
Yeah, I searched for something I read recently and couldn't find it that talked about stretching in high temps. Basically, just like stretching inconsistently. You get a short-term benefit right then and there, but unless you do it routinely, it goes away. Kind of the same idea, but this article in particular espoused the benefits of cold stretching in terms of overriding the stretch reflex, etc. But then, I mean, you put cold stretching into a Google search engine and all you get is don't stretch in the cold, don't stretch in the cold. Some of it stands up, some of it does not. Fact is, I can't find anything that's super helpful on this other than, the random study here and there that talks about stretching heated muscles, improve flexibility. But again, in the short term, right then and there, get a half hour past the workout and the benefits basically evaporate. And then when it comes to, I don't know if you're leaning toward hot yoga here, there's a dearth of information or research on hot yoga. So good luck finding a report to tell you anything about hot yoga.
Yeah.
But so if someone wants to do yoga and do hot yoga, could they then mix the sauna with the hot?
I have to believe there's going to be some overlap in benefit, right?
Yeah.
Some of those physiological responses are still going to happen because you're dealing with heat. You're doing a bit of work in the heat. So yeah.
And it's usually pretty humid in those rooms too. But it's pretty gross, man. It smells terrible.
No,
a lot of that's from sweat.
I've done Bikram yoga a few times, and it's for some reason it's always a carpeted room.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
while I'm
same.
working out, like a stream of sweat.
It's not
like
beads.
not drips, but a stream. And I'm like, it's going in the carpet, guys.
This is gross.
And everyone else is going in the carpet,
and everyone else seems fine with it. Yeah. I'm not a Bikram guy.
I've done it on wood floors, but then you got your yoga mat and then the wood, and then it doesn't go on the carpet, so you have these pools of sweat around,
gross.
which is just gross. I mean, from my own perspective, I can't imagine what other people are thinking.
I know. Oh man, it's rough, man.
But so in summary, saunas after workouts, yes. Cold water, maybe, but probably not.
It'll feel good, but don't necessarily think that it's gonna, make you recover faster.
And is it risky to stretch while it's high? Inconclusive, probably not risky, but probably not benefits. But then if you do a hot yoga, maybe you're getting the sauna part at the same time of doing yoga, and there is benefits to being able to be a pliable, supple leopard athlete. Right?
Yeah.
It's a good book. Good book.
It absolutely is.
Let's go into the last one is from David here, and then we'll answer some questions from the live stream. David says, hi guys, you're thoroughly worth your 5-star iTunes review. Oh, thanks folks. You can leave those on iTunes. I think at this point we're still in the lead. So we're still the most.
So if we meet Lance at 24 hours, and I've been calling it 24 IHOP, it's just more fun. But 24 hop.
I like that plan way better.
Hours in Old Pueblo.
Way
24 hours IHOP.
Pancakes versus riding.
I know it wouldn't be cool for me to mention it because he doesn't know there's a competition. But I want to, but I won't. We might just see him there.
Yeah, I wonder if he will be there. Who knows?
If you pass him, can you say we've got more reviews than you?
Yeah, I'll
just
let him know.
as you drop it.
I'll be sure to do that.
You throw some gas on that fire.
He's pretty fast still.
He's very fast. Yeah. He seems extremely competitive still too. So
he's still Lance Armstrong.
Yep, that's the truth. He says, I'm a 51-year-old man about to go into my 3rd season of training with TrainerRoad, and my 2019 A race will be Haute Route Alps at the end of August. From my experience over the last 2 years, I think I'm FTP constrained by some old injuries, as sustained VO2 max and supra-threshold workouts can cause pain in my knees and hips, and he references high power and high cadence tends to hurt my hips, while high power and low cadence tends to hurt the knees. He says, That's
not good.
No, it's not good. Those are bad signs. He says, as I want to get faster, my objective is to maintain my FTP in the range of about 290 watts, but lose weight to get around, and he says lose around 7 kilograms or 10%. That's a lot. He says, as I think I will get more benefit from having higher watt kg than trying to get a marginal improvement in my FTP for a multi-day alpine event. He says, I'm also in the awesome position that having just accepted a severance package from work, I can totally commit to my training, nutrition, and recovery to this objective over the next 6 months. What plans would you recommend for weight loss while adhering to the endurance diet? He says, I was going to go for the sweet spot base high volume plans, then sustained power, high volume sustained power build, and then the climbing road race for the specialty. I actually think that's a pretty good progression in terms of plans for those races.
I like it too. The high volume kind of spooks me, but
yeah, good point. Yeah. He says, I think I can handle the high volume as I've just managed to maintain 800 plus TSS 6-week average cycling in the Canary Islands. And he says, I know not all TSS is created equal. So I assume that was accrued over lower intensity. I think that's what he's implying there. A lot of lower intensity stuff. So he says, cheers and keep up the good work from David. So I guess the first thing that stood out to me, and I guess to all of us here, is the pain that he's experiencing. Because he says he's FTP constrained, but perhaps he's not FTP constrained. Maybe he's more biomechanically constrained.
Probably. Absolutely.
And
the first thing I would look at.
I did the math, and 290 at 70 kilograms, which is That's 4.14
Pretty great, yeah.
Watts per kilo. So if you
At
lost,
51 years of age, too.
yeah, but if you lost like more than 14 pounds, he'd be at 4.6.
Sheesh.
But losing more than 14 pounds is
That's hard.
like 10% of your body weight.
That's hard.
That's really hard.
Yeah. It's lofty.
Yeah,
It's
no
not to say
doubt.
you can't do it. And also maybe he's bumped up against the plateau. Maybe at 51 years of age, at that body weight, 290 watts. I mean, I'd be pretty happy with that personally.
Pretty good. If
No,
you-
yeah, 4.14.
That's good.
Really good.
So, and I guess the first things first, though, if it doesn't matter what his watt kg is, if he's got problems going on.
I can't tell you how many athletes I reformed over the course of my strength work, because I've always been an endurance athlete. I just ventured into strength long enough to build a business and head this direction. But, I learned a lot along the way, and I saw a lot of athletes who were in basically this state where they had mostly weak hips, but also as a consequence, and just kind of carries down the line, weak knees, weak ankles. So they were, there's got to be a better way to put this, but joint challenged. They didn't have the structures necessary to actually put out big watts and not do it with some level of pain, and they just habituate to it and just accept that that's part and parcel. This is how I feel. This is what I'm going to have to tolerate. I can work more. I can lose weight. I can build my FTP, but I'm just going to have to deal with this pain. And you so do not. It's such a remediable.
Yeah.
Again, I'm making up words.
I got it.
I understand, Chad.
You can remedy it absolutely at any age too. Not that 51's that old either, but and it's really quite simple. It's hip stabilization. Start there. I mean, if you're not stable in the hips, even turning the pedals is problematic. So, and there's so many easy fixes for it. Body weight ones, banded ones, actual strength exercises. This might be one of the few cases for using machines in a gym, is go in and cultivate better movement patterns and start to learn to actually shift a little bit of a load around without compromising your joint position and causing yourself pain.
2 things they probably shouldn't do in the gym with machines.
Yeah, this is just our
Leg
opportunity to
extensions,
plug how bad these things
hamstring curls.
Yeah, I don't see as much injury with hamstring curls, but with leg extensions, it's in every. You go to a gym that has 4 machines. One of them will be a leg extension machine.
Yeah.
And it puts so much stress.
It's such a dangerous way to load that joint.
Yeah.
You can put so much weight on it, and so many guys do because they want to see these big old ballooning quads, which I got to admit, it's pretty impressive, but it's not doing good things for your body. And it's creating probably imbalance because most of these guys don't flip over and do the hamstrings. And even if they do, it's another improper way to load that joint. It's just not.
So what would you like for a machine? If someone, so what we're saying here is that David may have some stability issues in his hips and in his knees. So maybe then going to...
I would start with a myth press.
Myth press.
Yeah. Yeah. So a Smith machine.
I got it. Smith.
Get in there.
Machine.
It's on tracks. You can't really hurt yourself. I mean, I'm sure you could find a way, but it'd be pretty hard to damage yourself, and you could really restrict the range. Start with, and that's the other thing. You don't have to load these exercises right away either. Get under there on something like a Smith press, or even just an unloaded barbell, and see to it that, or maybe not even anything, maybe just a body weight squat, and see that you can actually move in a proper manner, which probably involves input or insight from a trained professional, which gets pretty iffy in a lot of cases. Some gyms do a really good job. I find specialty gyms to be the best way to go. Don't go to a block or a chain gym and expect a high level. I mean, I'm sure there are some good trainers in there, but so many of them just do not know what they're talking about.
Could also doing body weight squats and then maybe holding dumbbells to increase the weight.
Absolutely. That's another way to load it. It's a safer way to load it. It's easier to balance.
And
there's a little bit of bilateral challenge or unilateral challenge.
Which is important. In this case, it sounds like there's some, like we're talking about stability and mobility, the ability to really control things and take some stress off those joints.
If he's managing to get 290 watts to the pedals with joints that just aren't doing what they're designed to do, I mean, not creating a very high level of stabilization, then with no more improvement in fitness, I'd be willing to bet he could push that over 300 watts just because he's not going to be hemorrhaging so much of his output to faulty joints.
The one thing with the Smith machine that I don't like is that it keeps you in a certain plane.
It's not. So it's just a way to maybe start.
It's a beginning thing.
Yeah.
That's you're going to ditch it later, right? You're not going to load that thing up with 225.
It's like the earliest steps in a step or a progression that will get you to a point where you can actually generate power with each leg independently, ideally, without causing yourself any form of joint pain.
Yeah, and I'd recommend the post that I put up in the forum, forum.trainerroad.com, all about knee injuries, and then at least what I'm doing on that. Because it's really about that. And it's really about, a lot of people, once again, we've covered this before, but they think that since your legs just operate kind of in the front to back plane when you're on the bicycle, that, you know, you don't have to worry about your hips.
They do, but there's so many counterbalanced movements and stresses on, you know, the outside of the leg, the inside of the leg. I mean, different positions shift emphasis to different points in the muscle. I mean, there's still...
Yeah, it's a ton. So, and a lot of the time when you see people's knees hatcheting in or out, when they kind of flare out and then cut back in, or flare in, cut back out, usually that
works out.
Yeah, and usually that's because of something, you know, going on in the hips, even though you probably think it's just because your knee isn't stable or something like that, but it's something else.
Yep. Or you've got too tight ITs, or, you know, and people misattribute it to a number of things when the fact is their hips aren't just very good, or just aren't good at helping their knees track. And if their knees can't track, then what sort of load does that put on the low leg bones and the low leg, the ankle joint, the foot itself?
Yeah, fix the hips. So let's just say he fixes that. He mentions the fact that, you know, he really wants to. He isn't necessarily focusing on raising his FTP for one reason or another, but he instead wants to try to lose weight. And we were thinking about, you know, the best way to manage weight and lose weight kind of in a responsible manner as a cyclist, because it's especially 10% of your body weight. That'd be pretty tough to be able to, you know, you might be tempted to do some crash tactics on that to try to get rid of that pretty quickly.
That usually works.
But I feel like the biggest thing that helped me was, you could call it keeping a food diary, but being more specific about it and counting my macros and weighing everything that I ate. You don't even have to do it forever. If you just do it once, it opens your eyes. Like,
the first
amazing.
step in analyzing your diet is accumulating information, right? You got to see what you're putting in your mouth, what you're eating, before you can change what you're eating. I mean, you brought up an interesting point yesterday where you talk about people have discovered that fat's actually good for us, and there are all these forms of, quote, healthy fats. So they start to integrate more healthy fats in their diet, never minding the fact that they've already got a ton of fat in their diet that's kind of flying under the radar. They don't even recognize how many sources of fat there are in their diet. I mean, I just learned yesterday that rice has a modicum of fat in it.
Oatmeal has fat in it.
Yeah. It's crazy, right? Like, it's so hard. Like, Nate and I are always thinking about, like, I used to get guac on things, you know, if I was at Chipotle or something. I never do anymore. I like avocado. It's great, but it's like I get so much fat from everything else.
Well, if you're looking at weight loss, just straight weight loss, I mean, you have to recognize how calorie dense fat is.
Yeah. The thing is, you just want to, by tracking it for a week, you can identify and realize that avocado or a spoonful of peanut butter or a handful of nuts has a whole bunch of fat in it. So if you, like I do eat avocado too, but maybe my breakfast is almost non-fat. And then at lunch, my main source of fat is going to be avocado, but I'm not eating 2 avocados, right? It's maybe half avocado.
It's hugely illuminating. I mean, so many people, and this is another thing I did when I trained people, I made them keep a food diary for a week, which is harder than you think it is, especially
it's annoying.
If you're snack prone and maybe you don't even recognize it, but you start logging everything you eat, not restricting it because, I got to write it down, so I'm not going to eat it. No, still eat it, or at least write it down so you know what you normally would eat. You'll start to see how much food you're actually putting into your mouth in a day.
It's a lot.
And it's usually very surprising.
Yeah, the whole principle behind the food diary isn't necessarily to say that fat's bad, this is bad, something like that. It's inform yourself, and this process is very illuminating.
And then you can manipulate those macronutrients based on what you're after.
Butter is like a pat of butter can be 200 calories.
Crazy caloric.
And if you do a 200 caloric deficit every day, a pat of butter,
it could be as simple as not buttering your toast in the morning. I mean, the deficit you're looking for might actually be that simple.
The next time you're doing a workout, swipe over on the zoomed in interval view on TrainerRoad. If you're doing it there, swipe over and look at how many kilojoules you've burned. And then when you get to the 250 point, think of that and like, that was that one piece of butter. It's a lot of work. It helps put it in perspective.
Or that beer.
In general, beer's worse. Let's for amount of calories, right?
Oh, it's terrible.
It's a hot dog.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned before, but one beer is at least
your beer.
Like a hot dog with bun.
2 hot dogs.
Yeah, Chad's more.
And cheese whiz.
Pretzel buns.
Whatever you might put on hot dogs.
He calls them big beers.
Yeah.
But so for endurance athletes, maybe we say macros like a 60-20-20, meaning 60% carbs, 20% fat, 20% protein. That could be pretty common. There's other...
All sorts of schemes.
There's all sorts of schemes.
Around.
But if you are on that 60-20-20 or on training days, I might try to be like even 70% carbs. It's just amazing how fast you can blow through those calories.
And in some respects, it's actually hard to get. I mean, enough food, like enough carbohydrate.
It's hard to get enough carbohydrate.
Yeah, I found that I was putting on more granola than I ever did onto my breakfast yogurt that I have with berries, right? Like I was doing things that were different than I thought, just trying to hit that. It's very illuminating. It helps.
Granola too, though. A lot of granola, like it'll be 20 grams of carbs and 14 grams of fat.
Plenty of fat.
A ton of fat.
And so with that, it's almost fat, per gram has twice as many calories.
Yeah.
So for the percentage wise, you're very behind with the granola.
Trying to pick foods that give you like the highest, I guess, the best ratio of macros becomes tricky, right? Like you're trying to pick the foods that have the rate or that will support the ratios that you're trying to hit at the end of the day.
Yeah. And so again, even if you're a fat adapted athlete or you want to go 40% fat, our point is you need to have the data to be able to make the choices.
Exactly.
Because I bet you 95% of people are like what you think it is, you're wrong.
Yep.
Yes.
Absolutely. You write that down, you look at a week's log, plot it all out, put it in a way that you can look at it in one viewing. Yeah. You will find ways to improve it right then and there.
Yep. I use MyFitnessPal for that, and I track everything I eat still. You kind of get into a situation where you weigh it once, and then you kind of figure that out, and you can even save that, which is helpful with that. So you can save that meal or that food choice, and then if you keep it consistent, you can just redo it. But man, it's very illuminating. But as a cyclist, if you're so focused on the output side of things in terms of the work, it makes sense to be equally focused, especially if your goal is weight loss on the input side.
Mm-hmm. And I also recommend buying a little cheap food scale for like $15, $20 on Amazon, rather than using a measuring cup, because you can do it by weight, and you can put it in MyFitnessPal by weight, and it's so much more accurate than trying to do a cup or
pack that cup down a little bit.
It's different. Yeah, exactly.
How much can I fit in this cup?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's the first step for losing weight.
Yep.
And then what's next?
I think from there it's so you look at it from a perspective of, okay, I'm aware of what I'm doing. Now, at least for me, what I've found to be the most effective way to lose weight as a cyclist, because you're not just trying to get skinny, you're trying to also improve performance, is to look at it like, I need to treat this like fuel. Like, I need to fuel my workouts. You mentioned that on certain days where you have like a hard training day, you'll shift your ratio that you have. And then on other days, you'll shift it down. And that's
more Chad. I'm more high every day because I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm trying to do such high volume that on my recovery days, what I'm really trying to do is replenish from the previous day.
Yeah.
So I want to. I'm definitely I'm trying to go extra to try to increase the volume.
The point is you're trying to fuel workouts.
Yeah, totally.
And that's how you look at the food intake that you have is, some people question this relationship that you can have with food. And by all means, this is something you have to kind of tread carefully here for sure. But if you view your food that you're taking in as fuel for your workouts, I feel like you'll increase the quality for sure, but then you'll also time it appropriately. And then when you aren't training as hard that day, and maybe, it isn't something where you have to really load for the next day, you might bring it down a little bit. But the point is, figure out what you're doing, fuel the workouts, and then you'll refine as you go.
Yeah, and understand that a high training volume isn't a pass to eat garbage food. Just because you need a lot of carbohydrates doesn't mean you can, grab a 32 or 64 ounce jug of soda pop or something awful like that, or even just pound the manufactured foods when you're not in a race scenario. Try to still eat healthy and high quality food. And I know that's what are high quality foods. That's a big topic, but Nate's experimented with it. He's found that staying as vegetable based as you can, it's never a bad thing.
Yep.
I can't find a single study that says it is, but. Just know that just because you need more carbohydrate doesn't mean you can have any form of carbohydrate and expect performance improvements and a favorable body composition.
Donuts are not the same as muesli in the morning.
In moderation. In moderation, everything's got a place.
So for David, what I would do is, one, do that week to really figure out what you're eating, because I think everyone should do that to get some data.
At least a week.
And then if he's doing like the high volume plans, which the high volume plans, I just want to stress for people, not many of people listening to this are suited to the high volume plans.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
It's especially a lot for an aging athlete. And we're all aging, right? But an athlete who's above 40, in this case, 50 years of age, it becomes just more and more of a tightrope, narrower and narrower tightrope.
So if then David is doing the high volume and he's eating relatively clean, donut once in a while, but is eating the whole foods and vegetables and stuff like that, I bet you, David, and you get a handle on what you're eating without tracking macros or calories, your body composition is going to improve if you're consistent on your plan and you're fueling your workouts automatically.
Yeah, and it'll be less about a weight goal in terms of a number. Your body will kind of like work its way into the ideal composition for performance. That's at least what I find. putting a number specifically to it, it can be good for a goal, anything else like that, sure. But at the same time, your goal should be on performance. And it's really easy.
It's always about
I see a lot of people trying to just lose weight like a normal person instead of a cyclist, and then that compromises performance more often.
The only we've talked about it before. If you're overweight or obese, that's one thing. But if you're a 4.1 watt rider, like you're not
at 50, no less.
Yeah, you can't have this huge percentage. This person's not obese, right?
No.
Like obviously.
Oh,
not.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So in that situation, just train for performance, and your body will come. The leanest I've ever been is when I trained the most, and I wasn't trying to lose any weight. I was just training a bunch.
Yeah, and fueling well.
Happens too. Yeah, and fueling well, right? And eating, focusing on the whole foods, the whole grains, vegetables, fruit, not on donuts and Popeyes.
Yeah.
I think it's been. How long
has it been?
I think in the past 2 years I've had Popeyes once.
Well done.
And it tasted gross.
Isn't it weird?
It's nice
feeling
good,
isn't
gross.
It? Yeah, it's like, oh, this is so bad.
Yeah, it's crazy.
But when you eat it all the time, it tastes so good.
I know.
Oh, man.
But I'm to that. That's another good point to people who have problems with cravings. If you can do it long enough, it
goes away.
It doesn't go away. It repulses you.
Yeah.
Like even the smell is gross.
Yeah, or you just can, at the outset of eating, know how you're going to feel afterwards, and it just puts it in perspective before you've even taken that first bite.
That's a good point. Is I think in the endurance diet, Matt Fitzgerald talks about this about juniors. Like they ate healthy for a while, but it's hard to get that mind-body connection. And you think of, okay, I know I'm going to have this bad meal, but I'm going to pay attention to how I feel afterwards. Because a lot of times I think people eat things and they just don't.
Oh, yeah.
They don't make that connection.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah,
so think
totally.
like, okay, I'm in this situation. I have to eat this food. I'm in an airport and it's the middle of the night. This is the only way I'm going to eat today, eating McDonald's. Eat that and then see how you feel afterwards.
So that's how you breathe a ton of useful information into that food log we were just talking about.
Yep.
After you eat everything, and maybe not literally everything, you don't have to drink a glass of water and note how you feel afterwards, but after every meal, how'd you feel? And you can start to draw connections between, oh, wow, maybe I don't tolerate dairy as well as I thought I did, or whatever, things like that.
Maybe a 2,000 calorie meal at KFC, which I did in college, makes you not feel good.
Believe it or not.
Maybe that's too much food for even my body.
Yeah.
Well, thanks to everybody for joining us. For the podcast here, we're going to answer some of the live stream questions that people have submitted. Chad's cooking over here. It's toasty.
Melting.
Always gets warm in our podcast room. So we'll run through some of the questions that people have submitted on Facebook and YouTube. You can join us usually every Thursday at 8 a.m. Pacific. Next week, we will not be live, by the way, because Chad and I will be in the Great White North. But we will still have a podcast for you guys that will be published for you on Facebook, YouTube, and all podcast channels. First one from Mike. Says you should go to Michigan in November to race Iceman. Mike, I don't know if I'll ever race that race. I don't really know if I have plans.
It's
gigantic. It's like the biggest race.
Gravel race on snow? Which I guess would be a snow race.
On snow, or it can not be on snow. It's a mountain bike race, and Kabush won it on drop bars this year. He threw the cat amongst the pigeons, so to speak. Like
100 miles
Iceman, folks, you can let us know, but it's somewhere around there. Yeah, it's a long day. I don't know if I'll ever do that one. I even have family out in Michigan, but by that time of year, it's always tricky with scheduling and all that stuff. But
I find that more interesting than Dirty Kansas.
Oh, Chad might go to Iceman.
I'm not saying that. just it's more interesting.
Let's see here.
Dave's got a good question.
Cool.
Why not mountain bike marathon plan for Leadville? What is it for? I think that the reason is because Leadville has sustained long climbs.
Technical, right? I mean, at any point was it technical?
There's a couple descents, but I would not call them technical descents. I call them
descents too.
They're gravel races. It's not. There's never any of these short, steep sections that you have to push over.
Yeah.
It's almost always sweet spot, especially over the gearing. If you came in with a 36 or something, you would, and you don't have a super high FTP. Like super, super high, you would do that. But that's the difference where on other races, other mountain bike stuff, there could be really steep 1 minute climbs and stuff like that where you're racing, but not in a 9 hour, 10 hour, 11 hour,
It's a totally different game.
An hour climb.
Yeah.
That's steady.
Yeah. Let's see. Somebody says the calendar has been life-changing. Thank you, from Josh. Good to hear. Okay, somebody asked, with Oz Trails, that specific race we were talking about, how much of going fast is having the handling skill to avoid braking on the downhills? He says, and carrying maximum momentum into the climb. That's like a really astute point. And we talked about that beforehand when I talked to all the pros that were going to race that one. I felt like preservation of momentum is like really important when you constantly have these fluctuations. And you do that by just braking less. And I know that sounds scary, but you also do that by not pedaling quite as hard, perhaps. Like you try to moderate everything, just kind of drop the levels on everything. And I think it makes a big difference. Especially they had the conditions where it rained and then it turned all that sharp little like limestone rock on edge and everyone was getting flats. If you push harder, you're more likely to make brash decisions like, brake really hard right now or try to change my angle really quickly. And as you do that on tricky terrain, you're more likely to either lose your momentum or have problems.
Let me say it another way. So there's probably a maximum speed on this turn, and you might want to be jamming into it at 500 watts, but therefore you're going to have to hit your brakes even if you're a top-end pro.
Yep.
But if you went in at 400 watts, and I'm talking about 10 seconds, that happens all the time in mountain biking,
Yep.
then you wouldn't have to hit the brakes at all. You maintain your momentum better through the whole thing, and you've just saved yourself 100 watts.
Yeah.
You've saved your and accelerating out, right?
Yep.
Because when you don't hit the brakes, like I feel like I never hit the brakes, and I just hit the perfect speed in the turn.
Yeah.
I feel like I always do it a little too much, and then
Right. Totally.
You're probably better at it than I am. But.
On a descent, we aren't hitting terminal velocity, right? In Lisa Bentonville, you're not. So as a result, if you tap those brakes at any point at the top or on that descent, you've decreased that amount of potential energy that can make you go faster. So the point is you don't want to do that and you want to keep it rolling. So a lot of it is, yes, having the handling skill or confidence to be able to do that, but riding it like 95 rather than 100% in that respect. And it does make you smoother. It makes you faster.
And you decay less over the race. That's the biggest part, right?
Totally.
And then if you do need to then attack,
Yes.
For me, it's just decaying less.
Yeah. And
that's less of a physical toll.
Yeah.
That's what we saw with those pro cyclocross rider files, right? Like in the sense that they were much smoother than we were.
Yeah.
That's just kind of how they work.
It's crazy to think, like, when you ride with a pro, there's the climb stuff, but on those kind of things, they're so much faster than you. Mm-hmm. But really a big difference is the carrying momentum. For instance, Pete too, our FTPs are pretty similar on crits, but he just he's so much smoother than I am on corners, on preservation of momentum, that I end up putting out more power.
Yeah.
And I go slower.
Right.
Which is so frustrating.
Yeah.
Right. So frustrating.
Yeah.
But it's a skill you can improve on, and if you know about it and you're aware of it, you just keep doing it.
Yeah. It's like every year, right? When you get back into riding with a group, you're like, we're always a little bit more touchy.
Yeah.
And then it just doesn't take long. And then you kind of settle back in. You're much more efficient. And
I've got a question, Chad.
Ooh.
Okay. So for coming up to Cal Aggie Crit that I'm going to do, bad weather up here, I'm probably not going to do very much group riding or fast group riding. I am going to do one mountain bike race that's kind of like Bentonville on off.
Yeah.
That will kind of help me, and that actually, I feel like mountain biking helps even my road skills a ton because it's easier. What do you think I should do to be able to start that crit that's coming up in, I think, 3 to 4 weeks, when I don't have a lot of opportunity to go outside, or if I do go outside, it's 30 degrees and I can't be like, bring 15 people with me.
In terms of getting used to riding in a group.
Yeah, or is it just something that's just going to be...
It's not a heck of a lot you can do.
Yeah.
Just focus on the fact that you've done it before, you know how to do it.
Yeah.
Staying relaxed, staying hyper aware, positioning yourself, not in dangerous positions. It might be a little easier to ride in mid-pack, but maybe you stay to the outskirts because it's just a little more dangerous in the center.
And this is why this happens to everyone, right? And why early season crits can be considered crashy.
Yeah.
Because everyone gets a little nervous, they're not as comfortable, and then people start doing weird things.
Yeah, and that course particularly is, it's very mellow, but has one spot where it depends, I guess. They changed the layout a bit, but it has a chicane. And that chicane... in that tight section can throw people off early. It's weird. If that was in
Land Park?
Yeah, Land Park. Yeah. Later on in the season, like if that was in a course, nobody would think of it twice about it.
Yeah, sure.
But early season, those little things can just throw people off.
Pete Morris sent me a file, and I'll put this, Ian, message me, and or message Pete, and we'll make sure we get this in the show notes on forum.trainerroad.com, but of a P12 racer tailgunning it. He's a big guy. Same size as me, but way more power. But for a 120-minute crit, he tailgunned the first 100, not 120 minutes, an hour and 20 minutes. He tailgunned for the first hour, and Pete was saying how well he did it because he would A lot of times he would move up naturally on the whole peloton would go really wide on this turn, and he would kind of just float in on the inside, not pedaling, and he would get right back in, move up 15 spots, and kind of drop back. He would do that for a whole hour, preserving energy, and then for the last 20 minutes, he just attacks.
Yeah.
And then when he attacks, spoiler alert, he ends up winning the race. He couldn't, of course, when you're tail gunning, you can't respond to attacks.
Right.
Yeah.
But
it's a gamble.
It is exactly that.
But it is a gamble, but still at an early, I think the safest spot is if you are a little bit off the back and you can really respond to crashes.
Crashes, and if you know you have a big engine, you can generate a lot of power. Even if a brake does get away, you hit that same 20-minute mark and you do your best to get across to it. I mean, those guys have been away. The whole field is basically on half a tank of gas by now. The guys who are in the brake are probably on about a quarter tank of gas, and here you are with 3/4 full tank.
Yep.
So you've got different cards to play.
Yeah. That could be an early season strategy when you know it's a crashy one, or if it's raining. I like that too because raining's even worse.
I feel like breakaways, it'd be super interesting to actually get data on this and trend it, but I feel like breakaways more often are successful later in the season than they are early in the season. And the reason that I say that, that's just from my personal experience, is because it seems like everyone's so eager when the beginning of the season,
everyone gives it a shot.
That, like, everyone tries and everyone just chases everything down. You know what I mean? Like, and you can't get away. But later on in the season, people are kind of like, punching my clock, so to speak, getting through it. And if somebody gets away, it seems like they're okay with it.
Or they realize that if I chase down this breakaway, I'm dead for the rest of the race.
Yeah.
Like it can be hard.
Yeah. Oh, it totally can be. Wayne says, I have a 50-mile mountain bike race on Friday. Can you guys discuss pacing for mountain biking? Is it all about perceived effort? Thanks for all you do to make us faster. So we discussed a whole lot about RPE, and with mountain biking, I find specifically, it's if you're winning the race and you're off and you're soloing, that's awesome. And you can, you can use power at least to keep yourself from going too hard, right? It's very rare in a mountain bike race and I'm like, I need to drag my power up, that's rarely what I'm using my power data for. I do look at power data, and it's usually, in most cases in a mountain bike race, I end up either bridging up to another group or I'll end up, stuck by myself, wherever that is in the race. And in those situations, I'm always looking at that, making sure that I don't go too hard, too easy. Because usually with mountain bike races, if they're shorter, you end up going out too hard.
And every early season is a new fact-finding mission. I mean, what you knew last year and what worked last year may not apply this year, and at least not this time of the season. So there's a lot of trial and error, flinging something out there and seeing if it works, seeing if your body can tolerate it. I mean, if you can make it work. When
it comes to a 50-mile mountain bike race, the thing that I would add is try to figure out how long that'll take you. And then look at your PRs for how long you've ridden with that. And if your power is way over that in the beginning, granted, you may have to, jostle to start with groups, but if it's way over that in the beginning, you can look at that and say, okay, I need to back it down. That's where I find it most useful.
Yeah.
It's at least in the moment. In post, it's super useful for analysis.
How many times have you done that where the first 10 minutes you look down and you're 10 watts, 20 watts over your threshold for a 5-hour race. And position doesn't matter because it's a long climb.
Right.
You're like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And then you pay for it later. The other one I want to say is like for Bentonville, that would be RPE based. I wouldn't look at your power meter at all because if you're doing these, you can't.
Too varied.
Yeah.
It's going to
40-second climbs. You can't do it.
It'd be really hard. Really hard.
But at Carson City, a 40-minute climb, definitely use your power meter on that first climb.
Yeah.
Because especially as the group surges.
I don't know why we haven't thought of that. You would love Bentonville. That would be such a fun course.
It's kind of far away.
It is, yeah.
Arkansas.
Yeah, it is.
It's not easy to get to.
You can fly directly to Bentonville.
You're right, because the Walmarts, there's probably a ton of...
Yeah, you can fly directly to there.
How about that?
The Walmarts, yeah.
The Walmarts.
I wonder how many Walmarts are in that town.
Oh, gosh, there are quite a few. Yeah.
Every other.
You can go to the original.
It goes house, Walmart. There's
actually one in downtown, and it's weird. It feels like a museum. Everything's perfect. It's like everything is like, there's like a person on every aisle making sure everything is perfectly aligned. It's weird.
It's a little creepy.
Yeah.
Paul asks, what training plan should I follow if I want to become a good roller? I can't ever say that. Roller, whatever. Okay, breakaway specialist.
Struggle with French.
He wants to be a breakaway specialist. General build or sustained power build? And the specialized period, I guess, rolling road race block. What to do, right? So if you want to be a breakaway specialist, I guess it matters if you want to do it by yourself or with a group.
Yeah.
Because by yourself, I would think sustained power.
Yeah.
You're just nailing it.
And a breakaway, if you're with a group, is over-unders.
Yeah, and you got to be able to create separation. So somewhere in there, you have to practice being explosive and practice really hard 1-2 minute efforts and following them up with high levels of FTP. High percentages.
Yeah, I feel like that's something that a lot of people misunderstand about breakaways is that it's not, you think it's crazy high intensity, and it's not.
Well, I mean, if it's
to make it happen,
if it's a solo break, then it's a solo TT. But if it's a group break or a small break of a handful of riders, it's a team time trial, which is one of the most painful undertakings
so hard
in the whole cycling lexicon. It's
so I would say general build, and if you're saying I want to do these solo for like 30 minutes, which is extremely hard, that barely ever happens. Then you can be a TTer.
You really have to be flying under the radar to make that happen.
Well, it's almost like it's allowed.
Yeah,
because
like
or you have to be at a much higher level.
Yeah.
Or you just do it at the right time.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Going back to that tail gunning thing, on a smaller field, this is what Pete does so well, and he's talked about it, but I just want to hammer it in there. You're tail gunning, and the field fans out, how he says. Everyone slows down. Maybe it's after preem, and you're tail gunning. What you do then is you pick it up maybe 100 watts, so they all slow down to maybe 23, but you suddenly fly past the front at 27, 28.
Yeah.
Everyone goes, oh my God.
It's a slingshot.
Right? Yeah. And so you've only done a little bit of energy, but they all have to then accelerate.
Cover it, which is like exponentially more energy.
Exactly. So I'm saying with Paul that if for sustaining power, we talked about you having that big snap.
Yep.
But if you are from the back.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And you can ramp it up and you do.
That's perfect.
Maybe it's only 20 seconds of something big, but you come back past the front of the group really fast.
That's a really good point. You don't necessarily have to be explosive.
Yeah.
But you do have to be able to have like a good 1 to 2 minute punch. Yeah. And then you have to be able to sit on it.
Yep.
Which is...
That's why we have those plans. I forget what I'm doing, Clark or something, but it's on sweet spot base and it's on the end where it's like a 30 seconds really hard, and then you sit at sweet spot.
Yep.
And if you come from the back, that 30 seconds might be enough where the people that are going to be in the break come with you, and the people that aren't are like,
yeah.
Or you tire everybody out. That's really, I think that's why Pete does it to us locally all the time.
Yeah.
He just does it
just to soften us up
4 or 5 times, and everyone's doing more work than he is, and everyone gets soft. And then there's the one attack.
That is the inspiration for race winner intervals, which aren't my invention. I mean, that's because that's how it works.
Yeah. That's how you win a race.
Yeah.
Right there.
You just keep hitting them.
Last question here from Darren. He says, great program and podcast. With choosing plans, what build plan would be best for a cross-country Olympic mountain bike racer? I read or heard general build, but I'm thinking short power might be better. Appreciated. So yeah, we kind of covered this.
Same
we didn't
two questions.
Talk about that really as far as cross-country Olympic. I'll give like 2 examples of courses that I would say like where for cross-country Olympic, I would use a short power build, or if I would use a general. And part of this also depends, once again, on how you're going to race it. And it also depends on what your fitness is coming into these things. But if there's a course that if you're not familiar with it now, we all will be familiar with it because the Olympics are going to be there in Southern California in San Dimas. It's called Benelli Park. That one is like, I think that the longest climb is 30 seconds, but they are so steep and really steep and repetitive. So you basically drop down the hill, then climb back up the hill, drop down, climb back up, like rinse and repeat. For that sort of thing, I would really want to work on short power build if that was my goal race, because that one is all about really short duration, but being able to redo it. Mm-hmm. So I would really, even though my specialty plan is going to focus a lot on that, I would start from the base side of things. But if I'm looking at going for something that's a little bit more stable, like for example, if you've seen down in Southern California, Fontana, or the majority of most like World Cup cross country races where they have like a 4-minute climb, maybe even in a course, I might do general build in that case. Make me a bit more well-rounded, knowing that the specialty plan is going to fine-tune the blade for those shorter efforts later on. So it depends on that and really how you plan on racing it. So everything else to add, Nate?
No, it's good.
Yeah. Cool.
You nailed it.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Once again, sorry for the audio issues if you're joining us live, but don't worry, it will be posted up live after this, or I should say posted up thereafter. It won't have any of the audio issues that you've been experiencing so far. So thanks for joining us. Remember, next week we won't be live. However, we will have a podcast that will be posted, and we will be live in 2 weeks with all of you. So we're looking forward to that. Thanks, everybody. Chat soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.